Hey, 6th grade, Mr. Herzberg here. Today is Monday, April 20th, 2020, and we're going to be doing a couple things today. It's Monday, which means Tom Sawyer. Also, we've got a journal, but why don't we go ahead and get started with last Friday's homework. We're going to go over it and talk about the answers. 3 ways in which Tom Sawyer tries to impress Becky in Chapter 7. He does it a couple different ways. Remember, we left off in Chapter 7. He sits next to her in class, and then he convinces her that at recess they should go and sneak out of school and go hang out at a nearby little bridge in a creek. He tries to impress her by asking her to marry him. He tries to kiss her, and then he tries to give her a brass doorknob, sort of like an engagement ring. How does Tom get into trouble with Becky? He slips up and tells her that he already has a girlfriend by the name of Amy Lawrence. So he's playing Becky when he already has another girlfriend. Number 3, draw a diagram of the game that Tom and Joe play with the tick. If you wanted to do a diagram, you just draw a line down the middle of your Google Doc, and on one side of the line is Tom's side, and on one side is Joe Harper's side. If the tick went over there, the boy got to play with it. If the tick on the other side, the other boy got to play with it. They just kind of took turns. How does Tom explain the engagement process to Becky? He simply tells her that people, when they want to get married or engaged, they tell each other they promise they won't like anyone else but that other person. They kiss, they exchange something, and then that's it. That's kind of how it works, at least in Tom Sawyer's mind. Next up, what clue do we have that this is not Tom's first engagement before Becky finds out? He slips up and tells her about Amy Lawrence. Why does Tom give Becky the brass Andurian doorknob? And a brass Andurian doorknob is just a really nice brass doorknob. He gives it to her because it's his engagement ring, to promise that they're engaged and they'll never see anyone else. Who is Tom's best friend? Well, he has a few. He got Joe Harper, and now we have Huckleberry Finn. I guess if you had to say so, it's probably Joe Harper. What did Tom and Joe play with during school? They played with a tick, which is a little bug, an insect. These kids are bored. What did Tom say he and Becky needed to be engaged? They just needed to promise each other that they wouldn't like anyone else, and a doorknob, and then a kiss. What upset Becky and made her cry? Tom slipped up and told her, again, he already had a girlfriend by the name of Amy Lawrence. Now, let's go ahead and take a look, that was Chapter 7, at this week's journal. Now, last week I gave you guys some practice over text evidence and reading a passage and then answering questions about the passage based on text evidence that you found. You had to cite the text evidence, and then on top of that you had to also paraphrase the evidence that you found. This week's standard is reading informational text 6.2, which is finding out the central idea of a reading. So you're going to read something and then tell me what you think the central idea is. So the central idea, what is that? Well, simply enough, a central idea is why an author wrote something. Why did he or she sit down and write something? What was their reasoning behind it? Okay? To entertain, persuade, or inform. Okay, those are always your 3 main reasons an author will write something. Entertain, persuade, and inform. Well, our case, as we're reading informational nonfiction texts, I'll get it right in a minute, we are informing. So today you're going to be reading a short passage about the Bermuda Triangle. I'm sure you've probably heard about the Bermuda Triangle, boats disappearing, planes disappearing without explanation. So you're going to read the passage, identify the central idea, and then you're going to write a short summary of the piece. So the central idea, you can do that in 1 sentence. Why did the author write this piece? Persuade, inform, or entertain, which of those 3. And then summarize it in 3 to 4 sentences. Okay? All right. Good enough. Let's go ahead now. This week, we're going to be moving in, or today, to Chapter 8 of Tom Sawyer. So I'll read a little bit of it with you like I always do, and then I'll let you guys go off on your own. So at the very end of the Chapter 6, Becky is sitting down and crying and upset because Tom slipped up, and he tells her that he already has a girlfriend. He tries his best to comfort her and talk to her but she's giving him the silent treatment, and she just starts crying. So he runs off and upset himself, but she tries to call him back, but it's too late. He's already long gone. And something you're going to learn about Tom is whenever he gets into trouble or someone scorns him or yells or gets mad, he always retreats into his imagination and kind of pitches a temper tantrum, runs off to usually Joe Harper and Huckleberry Finn, and they pretend. Whether it be they're Robin Hood, they're going to pretend they're pirates, they're going to pretend they're bank robbers, cowboys, whatever the case, army, they're always going to find something to Tom and kind of sinks himself into things so he can forget about whatever has happened. If Polly's getting on him about something, he's going to run off. So it's no different here. So let's go ahead and start chapter 8. Tom decides on his course, old scenes reenacted. Tom dodged hither and thither, through lanes until he was well out of the track of returning scholars, and then he fell into a moody sort of jog. He crossed all small branch 2 or 3 times because of a prevailing juvenile superstition that crossing water baffled the pursuit. Half an hour later, he was disappearing behind the Douglas mansion on the summit of Cardiff Hill, and the schoolhouse was hardly distinguishable away off in the valley behind him. And then he entered a dense wood, picked his path to the center of it, and sat down on a mossy spot under the spreading oak. There was not even a zephyr stirring. The dead noonday heat had even stilled the songs of the birds. Nature had laid in a trance that was broken by no sound but the occasional far-off hammering of a woodpecker. And this seemed to render the pervading silence and all loneliness of the more profound. The boy's soul was steeped in melancholy. His feelings were in happy accord with his surroundings. He sat long with his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands, meditating. It seemed to Tom Sawyer that life was nothing more than trouble, at best, and he was more than envied almost Jimmy Hodges, so lately released. It must be very peaceful, he thought, to lie and slumber and dream forever and ever, with the wind whispering through the trees and caressing the grass and the flowers on the grave, and nothing to bother to grieve about, even anymore. So Tom always thinks of death whenever he gets in trouble. He just imagines, what would they all feel if I was dead? Very sort of immature retreat. If he only had a clean Sunday school record, Tom would be willing to go right now and be done with all this. Now as to this girl, what had he done? Nothing. He had meant the best in the world and been treated like a dog, like a very dog by her. She would be sorry someday, maybe when it was too late. Ha! If he could only die, temporarily. But the elastic heart of youth cannot be compressed into one strange shape long at a time. Tom presently began to drift insatiably back into the concerns of his life again. What if he had turned his back now and disappeared mysteriously? What if he went away, ever so far away into the unknown countries beyond the sea, and never back again anymore? How would she feel then? The idea of being a clown reoccurred to him, only to fill him with more disgust. For frivolity and jokes and spotted tights were an offense to him now, when they intruded themselves upon a spirit that was exalted into the vague, august realm of romantic. No, he would not be a soldier. No, he'd be a soldier, and he would return after long years, all worn and illustrious. Better yet, he would join with the Indians and hunt buffalo and go on the warpath in the mountain ranges and on the trackless great plains of the far west. And away into the future, come back a great chief, bristling with feathers, hideous with paint, and prance into the Sunday school house, drowsy summer mornings with a blood-curdling war whoop, and sear the eyeballs of all his companions with unappeasable envy. But no, there was something even gaudier than this, he thought. He would be a pirate. That was it. Now his future lay before him. In glowing with unimaginable splendor, how his name would fill the world and make people shudder. How glorious he would go plowing the dancing seas in his long, low, black-hulled racer, on the spirit of the storm, with his grisly flag flying at the fore, and at the zenith of his fame, how Tom Sawyer would suddenly appear at the old village and stalk into the church, brown and weather-beaten in his black velvet doublet and trunks, his great jackboots, his crimson sash, his belt bristling with horse pistols, his crime-rusted cutlass at his side, and his slouching hat with waving plumes, his black flag unfurled with the skull and crossbones. And here, with swelling ecstasy, they'd all say, "It's Tom Sawyer, the pirate, the Black Avenger of the Spanish Main, here." Yes, it was settled. Tom's career was decided. He would run away from it forever. He would start the very next morning. Therefore, he must now begin to get ready. He would collect his resources together. He went to a rotten log at hand, near a dig under one of it, with his Barlow knife. He soon struck wood that sounded hollow. He put his hand there and uttered an incantation impassively. "What hasn't come here, come. What's here, stay here." And then he scraped away at the dirt and exposed a pine shingle. He took it, disclosed a shapely little treasure house whose bottom and sides were of shingles, and in it lay marble. Tom's astonishment was boundless. He searched his head with a perplexed air and said, "Well, that beats anything." Then he tossed the marble away piteously and stood cogitating. The truth was that a superstition of his head had failed, which he and his comrades always looked upon infallibly. If you buried a marble with certain necessary incantations and left it alone a fortnight, and then opened the place with incantations he had just used, you would find that very marble. And not only that one, but all the marbles you had ever lost gathered together, no matter how widely they'd been spread. But now, this thing had actually and unquestionably failed. Tom's whole structure of faith was shaken to its very foundations. He had many a time heard of things succeeding, but never of failing before. It did not occur to him that he had tried several times before, but could never find the hiding place again. He puzzled over the matter for a time and finally decided that some witch had interfered and broken the charm. He thought he would satisfy himself on that point, so he searched around till he found a small spot with a funnel-shaped depression. He laid himself down and put his mouth close to the depression and said, "Doodlebug, Doodlebug, tell me what I want to know. Doodlebug, Doodlebug, tell me what I want to know." And the sand began to work, and presently a small black bug appeared just for a second and then darted back again in a fright. "Ha! He doesn't tell. So it was a witch that done it. I knowed it." He knew well the futility of trying to contend against witches. So Tom gave up discouraged. But it occurred to him that he might as well have the marble, instead of just throwing it away, and therefore he went and made a patient search for it. But he couldn't find it. No, he went back to his treasure house and carefully placed himself just as he'd been standing when he tossed the marble away. And then he took another marble from his pocket and tossed it in the same way and said, "Brother, go find your brother." He watched where the marble stopped and went there and looked, but it must have fallen short or gone too far. So he tried twice. The last repetition was successful. The two marbles lay within a foot of each other. Just here, the blast of a toy trumpet came fatefully down the green aisle of the forest. Tom flung his jacket and trousers and turned a suspender into a belt. He raked away some brush behind the rotten log, disclosing a rude bow and arrow, a lathe sword, and a tin trumpet. In a moment he seized the things, bounded away, bare-legged, with fluttering shirt. He halted under a great elm, blew an answering blast, and then began to tiptoe and look warily out of his way. He said cautiously to an imaginary company, "Hold, merry men! Keep hid till I blow!" And then appeared Joe Harper, just as clad and elaborately armed as Tom. Tom called to him, "Hold now! Who comes here into Sherwood Forest without my pass?" "It's Guy of Gisborne, once no man's pass. Who art thou that dares to hold such language with me?" said Tom, prompting, for they talked, by the book, from memory. "Who art thou and dares to hold such language with me?" "I indeed, then, am Robin Hood, as they kitef. Carcass soon shall know." "Then thou art indeed the famous outlaw Robin Hood? Right gladly will I dispute with thee the passes of merry woods. Have it thee." They took their swords, dumped their other traps, and on the ground struck a fencing attitude, foot to foot, and began to carefully combat. 2 up and 2 down, presently, Tom said. Now, if you've got the hang of it, go at it lively. So they went at it lively, panting and perspiring with the work. By and by then, Tom shouted, "Fall down! Why don't you fall?" "I shan't. Why don't you fall? Yourself. You're getting the worst of it." "Why, I ain't anything. I can't fall. That ain't the way it is in the book now." "Come on now, Joe. The book says here, then one backhanded stroke, he slew poor Guy of Gisborne. Well, you're to turn around and you let me hit you in the back." There was no getting around the authorities. So Joe turned around and received the whack, and he fell. All right, I'm going to stop there. We have 1 page left in chapter 8, guys. If you don't understand this, meet me in the Google Meets 1 to 1:30 tomorrow. Y'all have a good day.